Hello everyone, my name is Victoria, and today I'll be your teacher for the English class on structure in poetry. Couple things that we will be analyzing today: themes and the tone that is carried out, context of the poem, so in which time period essentially. We'll also be looking at the rhythm. Finally, what's the overall message? Let's look at Shakespeare's Sonnet 12. Here I've highlighted some of the important words. In the first line we can see the words clock as well as time. On the second line we have day as well as night, and then we see violet past prime, trees that are barren of leaves, mention of seasons, summer's green, which is actually just an expression for spring. Note the amount of times that the word time is mentioned. The last line talks about breed, and here he's talking about kids, which are the legacy that we leave behind. We, the readers, are presented with this sequence of imagery through Shakespeare's choice of words that are all sort of alluding to the passage of time, the seasons, and samsara, which is the cycle of death and rebirth. Through the eyes of the narrator, we observe from the very beginning the theme through adjectives that Shakespeare chooses to describe the narrator's surrounding, such as flowers that are past their prime, trees that are barren of leaves. Let's analyze the last two lines, which is called a closed couplet, which are two distinct lines from a poem used to highlight an important passage or closing sort of rhythm. In Shakespeare's last usage of the word, time now represents something much greater, which is why he chooses to capitalize it. He's personifying this thing that is coming to us, this debt collector. It's an almost godlike figure with reigning power over the narrator, representing mankind. There's an expression that we say a lot when we're presented with an unpleasant task: your time has come, where time represents like a debt collector or the end or something we have been trying to avoid but can't because it's inevitable. In the line, and die as fast as they see others grow, Shakespeare is saying that no matter how beautiful of a life you may have lived, there's nothing much we can do to escape the inevitable end. When he talks about breed, he's essentially saying our only hope for a sense of continuum and relief that our stories will live on is to immortalize our legacies through children who will carry on our breed. Throughout the poem, we see a really extensive usage of color. So in order of presentation, we have violet, sable, silver, white, as well as green. So it really brings the readers along this transient fleet through summer, fall, winter, and spring. Shakespeare's choice of using the flower violet in his poem is actually quite clever. A lot of flowers don't necessarily allude to the color, such as peonies or tulips, so the choice of violet brings a clever duality that references both a seasonal moment as well as tying back to that colorful imagery of the beauty that stems from early life and nature. Another color we see being used is sable, dark, sort of aged brown. It introduces a sort of passage into autumn, and it also carries this really mature and regal weight. White is also mentioned common symbolisms for peace, purity, innocence, but it also is the color of snow or even evidence of age on someone's beard. An interesting use of color to identify passage of time. Let's move on to Wordsworth. This poem, We Are Seven. Here I've highlighted some of the important words. Because the author illustrates so vividly the scenario as well as the characters, it's more interesting to look at what they're discussing in terms of the message that is being portrayed. The narrator and the little girl are having a discussion about how many siblings she has. More specifically, the man is trying to enlighten this child that her mother has 5 kids because 2 of them are dead. So because of this innocent image initially portrayed of the girl, as well as her lighthearted and simple answers, the reader feels this immediate sense of sadness for this kid's loss. She doesn't really show any kind of emotional reaction, convincing both the narrator and the audience she's in deep denial of tragedies she lived through. The themes carried through is eeriness, which the author creates by illustrating this beautiful, lively child with curls that cluster around her head and very fair eyes, who knows not of death and its burdens. This imagery of innocence helps the narrator build an impactful contrast and surprise the readers when we discover this little girl spends her day playing on the graves of her dead siblings as if they were still alive. Let's look at context of time and place, such as political as well as financial, can really influence the theme of poetry that was written in that time. That could certainly explain, or at least offer hypotheses as to why 2 of the siblings in We Are Seven are dead. In 1789, the year Wordsworth wrote this poem, the Industrial Revolution had just begun. It wasn't yet in every home. Quite often there was a lack of access to revolutionized technology. The USA was fighting for their independence from Britain, which caused a number of wars and revolutions which required men and young boys. Their life expectancy was quite low. They might have contracted some sort of disease. In a lot of rural areas, quite a bit of artist labor is still performed by children, so this could also serve as an explanation for the passing of the little girl's siblings when taking into account the context of historical events of that time period. Just to kind of help us with the vocabulary used to analyze poems, a stanza is a paragraph in a poem made of 4 lines. Onto the rhythm of We Are Seven. So here, Wordsworth creates a rhythm through the form of a ballad, essentially a text that is composed of stanzas, and it carries a really simple rhythmic rhyming pattern of A, B, C, D, and so on. So if we look at the 3rd stanza, the endings of the 4 sentences is A, B, also known as a Shakespearean sonnet. The way we count meters and rhythm is the number of stressed and unstressed feet, or a conjunction of 2 syllables. They do not have to be in the same word. For example, I ate a banana, I ate a banana. So this sentence has 3 meters. For example, stanza 9. In the first and second line, you and your is the stressed syllable. However, the last 2 lines, it's the second syllables that are stressed as opposed to the first ones. Wordsworth creates unbalanced beat to the reading of the poem. We Are Seven would not qualify as an iambic pentameter. Between the 2 poems that we looked over today, I think I preferred We Are Seven because the vocabulary. Shakespeare uses more older lexicon such as born or beer from line 8 of Sonnet 12. Shakespeare's work tells a story through scenery. If you have trouble understanding the description, you are unable to visualize the setting. Inevitably, you fail to understand the overall meaning behind it. For example, lines 5 to 6. When lofty trees I see barren of leaves, which erst from heat did canopy the herd. We must look into context of the usage of barren, lofty, erst, and canopy. Barren means unfruitful, lofty means extending high into the air, erst means formerly, and canopy is a shelter. The author is literally describing this big tree once full of leaves that would protect and shade the animals. This imagery is actually a symbolism in context of Sonnet 12's theme, Passage of Time, of the care and protection a parent provides for their children. Profound understanding of Shakespeare vocabulary is often required to understand what's the overall message. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope I was able to explain some things. Thank you once again for sticking around until the end.